welcome to Crossing Darkness, a podcast about the role-playing games set in the world of darkness. We're broadcasting over Twitch Sundays 7 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. Central Time, and we are open with chatting with fans during the show. Um, I'm your host, Frozen Fallout, and my co-host is Motor Rory, who's helped me build this podcast as well as a 40-person, four-table Gen Con event that we ran 3 years in a row at Gen Con. How's it going, Moto?
Pretty good. We're a little bit of ways away from Thanksgiving now, so we're into the Christmas season. And I'm just having a good time staying at home by myself on the weekends.
Yeah, it's been relaxing. It's been the most relaxing holiday season for a long time for me. So today's episode we are going to be talking about the Technocracy. So the Technocracy comes from the Mage the Ascension game that's part of the World of Darkness setting. The Technocracy primarily are seen through, at least in first edition especially, they're the bad guys, 100%. They're Big Brother. They're the thing that's crushing all hope and all humanity and making them all drones that just want to, 1984 kind of stuff. But that kind of changes up, and there's kind of some different views. Mike, I think you have quite a bit of a different view on what the Technocracy is. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure because, like you said, they're the bad guys at least. I mean, we have to remember that as they were developing the games, like for example, the Sabbat were mentioned in one of the first edition games of Vampire, but they were never really fleshed out. But now they're a major part of Vampire. In the same way, the Technocracy was kind of this generalized idea of all the oppressive notions of backroom conspiracies and government control and shadowy cabals managing technology and just being generally evil in first edition. But then they had to actually flesh it out, and it turns out that the Technocracy is just as rife with dissidents as any tradition mage cabal or tradition. And then on top of that, I tend to think that the Technocracy really, well, actually, just like any other bad guy, the Technocracy believes that they're the good guys, and that tradition mages are the bad guys. Although they probably both see Nefandi as pretty bad, so there's a little common ground there.
Yeah.
But once you get into the history of it, the Technocracy, it's like, as I was reading through in preparation for this, I kept thinking to myself, like, which side of the political spectrum, left versus right, are they? Because on the one hand, there's kind of that leftist view of we need to protect people from themselves. We need lots of regulation. We need to prevent, overzealous assholes, basically, from damaging society. And so they need to proactively do things like prevent bad technologies from getting out into the world that sleepers can use and destroy themselves. But at the same time, they are themselves taking part in what we would consider the worst aspects of right-wing ideology, where they want to destroy individualism and they want to prevent revolutions through mind control. let's say, which is kind of Nazi-ish. And speaking of history of the technocracy, they ostensibly aligned themselves with the Axis powers in World War II, until, of course, they found out that the Axis powers were rife with Nefandi, and so they kind of just backed off from it. Although I'm sure there's a lot more that I could read about that would inject all sorts of uh, nuance to those positions.
Right, and that's some of the interesting things. And I think we've talked about this before. Um, and one of the things that I kind of get, it depends on where in time you are, and it also depends on what is um, the current um, zeitgeist of all the stuff that's kind of going on. Because it's not really a left or right political position that they are. They're the
Yeah,
one
it is
world
not.
government. They're the the shadow behind the control of the entire um, world. Basically, they're um,
Well,
so
they
there's
try to be, at least.
right. Well, you got the New World Order, who is basically, you can kind of see them as the group that handles the UN and the concept of trying to create a one world government, and they've done it behind the shadows, but they haven't been able to do it in the open, which is some of the interesting things that I don't think I've ever gotten into. Like, what is there a big divide between the technocrats, that because there are technocrats and the technocracy exists inside of Japan and China, Asian countries are all still under the control of the technocracy, but they do have a different paradigm, and that paradigm does uh, change things. Like, some of the things that I know more about, that isn't really technocracy or mage related, but it's more of the Vampire the Masquerade regarding the cage or the Kindred of the East. So the Kindred of the East,
Yeah.
one of the things that they kind of talk about when you're playing in Tokyo and Japan is that the Masquerade is not as like held to, because people are much more willing to allow for a vampire that's a demon to bust through their house, smash up a whole bunch of shit, and then they'll just continue drinking their tea. I mean, it's definitely one of those taking it to the extreme to create um, a sense of difference between our two worlds that definitely doesn't really exist. Um, and but it's one of those things that they're more accepting of the supernatural over there, and therefore they don't freak out about it, or they don't go talking to the um, reporters or to the police about demons. They just talk about it as being normal people, that you know an explosion happened instead of a demon running through my house type thing, and they're just going to do that inherently. Whereas in America, they're much more likely to go, there was a crazy demon that like did this. So you have to have a masquerade to enforce.
Yeah. And actually, maybe we should talk about that for a little bit. In my gaming group that I played a verbena in for like 5 years, we did have a lot of technocracy stuff. But one of the a generalized topic of conversation that came up a lot was kind of how, despite the fact that the world of darkness is supposed to be set in our current world, you know, kind of, except a gothic punk version of our world, uh, there's a very Western culture centric emphasis on the game. And part of that is because all the writers were based in the United States. We have a very Western centric paradigm. Uh, and so we don't generally think too much about what's happening around the world, especially in the US.
Was it set in?
Uh,
I thought it wasn't. Was White Wolf an American company? I thought it was a European company.
yeah, No, they currently are a European company
Okay.
because it was, I think that I can't remember where they are currently. I I don't know.
Hmm.
Whoever bought it from CCP is it's either Norwegian or Danish or Swedish, something like that. Um, but no, White Wolf was based in Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
That's
Okay.
where
Yep.
that's where all those guys were from. And when we went to that one thing at Gen Con a few years ago where they had uh, Brian Reinhagen and a few of the other uh, people, they were talking about how Gen Con in Milwaukee was like the big place where all the companies dropped their big books because that's where all the money was.
Oh yeah.
That was
Yep.
the deadline. It was, you needed to get your books printed before Gen Con so they could be there at Gen Con to sell because you didn't have internet marketing or uh, cell phones or Google. Uh, but anyway, so I was talking about the Western centric nature of the game, and a lot of the so what's the general idea that I'm talking about? When they delved into cultures outside the United States, there's two problems. The first is you're gonna be racist. That's that's just a given. You're gonna be no matter how you deal with the subject matter, you will be accused of racism because you're not from that culture, you're not from that area, no matter how well you handle it. But on the other hand, the problem is when you actually try and do a good job, uh, you're still going to be accused of racism and cultural bias and all these things. And so there was kind of uh, this double edged sword. So the actual second problem is uh, not doing it is also racist. That's the actual problem. Uh, so you either make the game entirely Western culture centric. It's only Europe, U.S., Canada, and Australia to a certain extent because they speak English and uh, mostly British descendants live there. Uh, or you expand into these other cultures. You write books about gypsies, about Africa, about the Far East. And so you're either accused of racism for not having the content or you're accused of racism for having the content. And so in that respect, when we talk about the technocracy, when they started writing it, I feel like they kind of that's why it's mostly Western centric because they didn't want to expand into those things because they weren't from those cultures. Later, they obviously did. There is a lot of technocratic lore that has to do with the Far East, although I'm not super familiar with it. Um, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of uh, source books that go into the technocracies dealings with Africa or South America or I know there's a bit of Far East stuff, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything on the Middle East or anything, but it's the idea behind it is still a even if from a Western point of view, a world-centric government, a one-world government where the syndicate is running racism is destroyed by the progenitors because of genetic engineering. The syndicate, brings about an economy that's a one-world economy. The NWO creates a one-world government that actually is a one-world government. The void engineers actually get to go into outer space and play Star Trek. And start to be able to explore. There is this idea that if everything all works out perfect for them, humanity gets to get to the next level of. I kind of see it as like a Gene Roddenberry point of view of humanity. Once we put aside all of our superstition and all of our stupid racism and all of our issues that are just childish problems, we can actually step up and start getting into outer space. Which, from a void engineer point of view, I could see that being why, would be the next step. I don't know if all the other people kind of agree with that Gene Roddenberry point of view, but
Uh, yeah, not everybody does, but that's what they're trying to do with the zeitgeist. They're trying to do that. But then, of course, the game lines then acknowledge the fact that despite the fact that they have lofty goals as the technocracy, those goals are still being enacted by human beings who have flaws, and there's a general kind of theme that there's just lots of uh, bad actors, corrupt people, nefandic influence at the top levels of the technocracy. Uh,
and not
Although I
just
think
the
in the early days there's less.
technocracy, but like the world is filled with these ancient vampires that are all evil. Like there's hardly a good one among those guys. They're all the damned. You've got werewolves who are going around, but they're still trying to, a huge chunk of the werewolves, even if they're not black spiral dancers, are hate humanity and kill on sight with like the red. Well, not kill on sight, but they're not very friendly with humans and very likely to kill them, like the Red Talons. Um,
Yeah,
so you have a bunch of the supernatural world that is just downright evil and dark, and I mean it's the world of darkness. So the population is more overpopulated than what we have right now. Our cities are more impoverished. Like our city officials are more corrupt, and that bleeds into the technocracy as well in a supernatural way. That's not just the human nature of it all. So you've got Pentex and possibly different ancient vampires that are deeply involved in the syndicate at this point, and the progenitors, as well as the NWO. But even the
yeah,
Order of Hermes, the traditions have the same problems. They had, uh, you know, vampires influencing throughout their history through the Order of Hermes. That even uh, the Chantry book that goes over the um, the main chantry for the Order of Hermes basically kind of goes into how they're also corrupted as well by this um, the Tremere.
yeah. No, the meta plots I'm not too familiar with on that. Um, and I know we were going to talk about the history, but I think maybe alternately, what if we talk about uh, the the ways in which uh, you and I have either used the technocracy in games or thought about the technocracy in games, and then we can talk about the game that you're running right now, which is a technocracy game.
Yep. Yeah, sure. If you want to go ahead and start off with how have you kind of seen the technocracy played out through your history of gaming?
Well, the the one game that I remember the most is the just about a year ago, and I've referred to it sometimes as the Charles game. That one ran for like 5 years. We ran it most weeks, and strangely enough, one of our player characters was a technocrat. I think I've referred to him on this podcast before. He was Shotty, the famous assassin from, I want to say, NWO, like the suits,
Yep.
right? There's that, yeah, New World Order, the suits. Um, Except he was on vacation, and for some reason he was assigned to go on vacation with our group, despite the fact that we didn't have any connection to the technocracy ostensibly. Um, it was mostly his excuse to have a sniper rifle that he could shoot into the air and kill anybody on the planet. Uh, he he wore like swim trunks all the time, or like Bahama shorts or whatever. You know, the floral print shorts. Uh, he was just constantly drinking. But when you needed him to shoot somebody, he could do it. He could possibly kill them 5 minutes ago if that was what you needed. Um, that was more of a fun way to include the technocracy in a game, where you use some of the lore and some of their procedures, their understanding of spheres and devices, to kind of just inject some difference into what was essentially a tradition game where we were fighting. Oh, who was the actual big bad? The big bad was the uh, the entity that lived on the other side of a black hole. We called it the Rock, and anytime somebody said something like slightly questionable, we called it Rock Talk, because one of the players looked at one of these rocks and was slightly under its influence for a while, and so we called it Rock Talk. That sounds like Rock Talk to me. Anytime somebody sounded like they were going off the deep end. Um, there were other times during that game where we did interface with the technocracy. I do remember there was one time where we had to infiltrate the Milwaukee construct and get a thing. Can't remember what it was. What was another one? We found a void engineer uh, hangar in California. That it was kind of one of those void engineers that's cool with the traditions, and kind of left the technocracy to do his own thing. We never met him. He was just we just found his hangar. And then in the end game, we were on spaceships all the time, so it was a lot of technocracy, and the it was basically Star Trek at that point. But that was fun because we could just go outside because we had spirit magic, and they were like, "What?"
Yeah, it's a lot easier to be a
Yeah,
technocratic or to be a tradition mage in outer space. Start looking like Q after a while.
yeah. But the main thing was that we didn't like at least Charles as a GM, he didn't make the technocracy out to be this monolithic thing that controlled everything. They were still just like any other big company. They have people at every level who are incompetent. Uh, their goals are kind of muddled between organizations. There's bureaucracy that screws with everything. Uh, there's people inside the organization that are doing bullshit that is secret because they have their own agendas. Uh, I think there was a lot of nephondic influence. Uh, it was, I mean, I liked it, the depiction of it, and I'm probably not doing it justice because uh, my memory isn't super great on that. Um, But anyway, so my question to you is for the Madison Under Siege games that we ran at Gen Con, you were the mage GM. What was the role of the technocracy there?
So the role that we kind of had originally with the technocracy was kind of stems from my kind of history of how I've kind of viewed the technocracy. The technocracy for me is always the thing that I used as the boogeyman throughout all of my games. And I played a lot of Vampire the Masquerade originally. So it was really nice to use the Mage the Ascension in just the technocracy as the bad guys from Mage the Ascension as the things that made everybody freak out about stuff. You weren't, you know, this is what kind of reined in people from being like, well, I'm just going to buy out corporations and I have just shell companies upon shell companies that can do, all these things. It's like, okay, all of your stuff that you're doing is mortal. You're not using any disciplines in order to achieve this. You're just talking to people. You're convincing other people. There's an organization that runs money and how money is handled, and they know more about it than the IRS could ever wish to believe, the way that money is handled in this world. you can't just do whatever the hell you want all the time. There's other bigger fish out there than just the the vampire that you are. So you, it was one of the ways of if you were like, okay, I'm really afraid of just base mortals kind of getting the news, but it's also much more about you don't want the technocracy to find out about what's going on when you're doing cover-ups for the masquerade. So masquerade breaches became real threats rather than just this hypothetical, oh, eventually it'll get covered up anyways. And it's like, yes, it's not the alerting society to your existence anymore. It's alerting the technocracy to your existence. And once you've done that, that's end. You're going to Mecca. You're gonna get locked up, and you're not going to be able to just, no matter how powerful you are, you need to either have had dealings with and made deals already, and that means that you have to have dealt, either with that in your backstory or with me, as a GM. Now you got to deal with the technocracy, and nobody wants to deal with that. So you use that as a way of keeping everybody from, you know, can I get to resources 6? Absolutely. Do you want resources of 6? Do you want a fame of 5? Are you able to actually handle these things without getting uncovered? Um, and the idea is in the early 90s, they had them out as being, and the Mage the Ascension, I really only read a lot of the first edition, because when it got to second and third edition, well, second edition revised, I skipped second edition and I read second edition revised, which brings the Avatar Storm, and that kind of is a big reset for everything. So after
Yeah.
1999, the technocracy changes, the tradition changes, and you can't get to the Umbra anymore. Um, and so, and control is no longer in control of the Earthbound technocracy. So after that time, you get to play with it a lot more as a GM and do a lot more than just have them as a big scary boogeyman from my point of view. So I like to play with them a lot, though, when they were the big scary boogeyman, when the war was really heated and tradition mages that were still around were extremely powerful, and what the technocracy had was extremely powerful. The thing about the technocracy, though, is that they're extremely um, their information is segregated. They make sure that people don't know what the hell is going on all levels. So just because you're a low level MIB doesn't mean that you know what a tradition mage is. Maybe you're a alien hunter. Maybe you're a person that hunt down vampires or werewolves or fae, or you might know these specialties, but you don't know the other stuff, and you don't share all of your stuff with all of the other MIB. You might not even know that there is an extremely big organization going on, depending on how where you are on the level with them. And a lot of them don't get higher. You don't go
Yeah.
up through the ranks to a certain degree in the
Yeah, no, a lot of the people that work for the technocracy and even know that there's something called enlightened science, a lot of them are not awakened. They don't have an avatar.
right. And so there's a whole kind of different feeling that you can get from them, I feel, as making them a really big boogeyman in the world of darkness. Um, I probably give them more power than they probably should have. I put them on the brink of basically winning the the war. That the war is basically over in 1998, and if it wasn't for the Avatar Storm, the traditions probably would have lost.
Like just completely lost.
I mean, it would have continued down that road of where people are not going to be wondered by science, um, and there's a big shift that kind of happens, in humanity when it comes to the internet. If they could have controlled that better, been around to do stuff during that timeline, maybe things could have been different. Of course, this is all taking into account what really happened and then trying to explain in the game, why things happened and different stuff like that. But I think that the traditions wouldn't have been able to really hold out very well. They were already retreating to Horizon, and the fight was happening on Horizon more than it was happening on Earth. I feel like if mages had a chance on Earth, they would be the ones coming out doing a bunch of magical tricks that really prove that magic exists and convincing people about magic. They can't do that though. If they tried, they would be immediately locked up. It's not paradox that they're afraid of. I mean, you've done stuff with mage now. You know that paradox is not necessarily the thing that's going to freak you out. It's dangerous, it's scary, but it's, if you want to really change people's minds on stuff, you can start doing fantastical things, and you can
Yeah.
build up towards that. But you're not going to be able to build up towards that. You're going to get caught by the technocracy.
Yeah. I mean, strangely enough, ironically, in the world that we live in today, there's probably more people that genuinely believe in what we would think of as tradition magic. Like, yeah, the types of people that go to Burning Man or go in, like, flat earthers. Like, just people want to believe in fantastical shit that we know doesn't exist. But in the world of darkness, it actually does. And, like, strangely enough, I think if you logically extend that war into the future, the technocracy is starting to lose. Like, their internal corruption, and, like, they've allowed technology to get to the point where people are communicating with each other, but there's no way, like, they at some point they gave up on the suppression of all, like, the crazy theories, and now just, like, there's all these, like, spikes of belief in what we would consider tradition magic. Fucking people that believe in crystals, and essential oils, like curing cancer and shit. uh People, like, astrology is, like, apparently a thing that a lot of people are getting into, and we know that that's technically bullshit, and the technocracy should be suppressing that type of shit. But in our current world, they're kind of not.
Well, and that
Um,
kind of is brought up with the Avatar Storm. When the Avatar Storm comes in, Control loses connection to everything, and the old technocracy is wiped out, and the new technocracy, the younger technocracy, is left around, which is one, a lot weaker. So they're not able to rein in all of this stuff. Two, they didn't know what the hell was the big plan, the true timeline of how things were supposed to be going down. Um, and so you end up with a situation where the technocracy loses control. And Mage 20, kind of talks about this, that you can kind of move forward with, the technocracy was winning the war, but now things are different. Like, the world is a different place in the 21st century, and the war, you can take in a lot of different ways. So we did expand it beyond the Avatar Storm, even in my game. So I originally, like I was saying, I had a bunch of, back in the 90s, they were the boogeyman. But now you bring them up to present day, 2016-ish, when we were running our games at Gen Con, and I had the technocracy be much more. There was um, a civil war that was happening between the between the Nefandi corrupted and the technocracy that had been working with tradition mages and are looking to try and build a new world, basically. And we had Technogate Command kind of leading that charge. Um, we also had still Mecha around and stuff like that, so there was some powerful Nefandius remnants of the old guard that still did a lot of capture and control of
Yeah.
humanity. But
Did you did you have the Nefandi running mecha in the Madison Under Siege game?
yeah, yep, I had the Nefandi
Okay.
in control of Mecha basically, and Technogate Command worked with um, them to like free a bunch of the. Uh, well, they I can't remember if they freed everybody, even the things that shouldn't be freed that were in.
My understanding was they busted that shit up and destroyed Mecha and let everything out.
Yeah, that's what I think happened at Gen Con. Causing some chaos, of course, but little growing pains for humanity to get through. Um, New things to fight in the future.
I think we might have glossed over the implications of that in the subsequent games.
Well, yeah, because it was year 2 that happened. In any
No, that was
case,
year one.
was it year 1 that they busted out everybody from Mecca?
I'm pretty sure it was, but
In any
yeah,
case,
I could be wrong.
so yeah, basically that's kind of how I've always viewed the technocracy as either being completely corrupt and completely in control of the narrative and running humanity, and everything else is hiding in the shadows for a real reason, not just the Inquisition with their pitchforks and their fires, and humanity is so scary when you see things like you know the ancient vampires and their capabilities. It's like, okay, you got to have something real that's threatening these things, not a bunch of pitchfork humans that can't.
Yeah, because ostensibly the masquerade is in response to, oh, when people like figured out that vampires were real on a large scale, they hunted us and we all died, or we were destroyed or stuff like that. And so the masquerade is there to prevent that from happening again. But you're right, it's like, why would an ancient vampire who has that much power be afraid of like humans? There has to be an organization that can really muster the destructive power that the technocracy is shown to have. uh, I believe there's something called a spirit nuke that might come into play in the Technogate game pretty soon.
Yep. So yeah,
Try not to speculate too much. I know how you like to change that shit.
yeah, it's possible that that might not happen actually. So we'll see. I'm
Yeah.
interested because actually there's you get to give you a little bit. You guys have the uh, chance to like change up a lot of history in this game. I'm kind of leaving the door open to see what kind of happens here. Um, but
Yeah.
in any
Right.
case, so that kind of segues into what we're doing with the technocracy in Technogate. So Technogate is set in 1998, which is 1 year before the Avatar Storm. Um,
Monday nights at 7 on Twitch.
yes. So we're playing a group that's part of the Technocracy, part of Technogate Command. Now, I've definitely made some major alterations to the timeline already. Like, General Bridges never got arrested during this time period, according to our history. Um, I don't even believe Senator Johnson is running things yet. He was, like, this is a big jump for him. Um, in the timeline of being able to take control of Technogate Command. Um, but I still have the way that I'm kind of running the Technogate or the Technocracy is that Technogate Command was always seen as kind of like a rogue fringe kind of element of the Technocracy, but extremely powerful, run by some people that have had time and um, knowledge behind them and rank and control of a lot of things for the last 100 years, give or take, with the Madison area and how it interacts with JD and the tradition mages of Madison. Um, but in general, I still have the Technocracy is an extremely powerful and corrupt organization. And I believe I've made that pretty well clear in our Technogate games.
Yeah, no, I think that's come through to an extent. Like, I mean, mostly with Senator Johnson taking over and putting Bridges in jail. Although there is the aspect that, um, now, spoilers. We've found out that a bunch of people in Technogate are conspiring with what we call reality deviants. It's you know we shouldn't necessarily be okay with that as technocrats, but we are, because that's just part of the game. I'm not sure where I'm going with that. Just a
Well,
thought.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing of what I've kind of done with Technogate so far for you guys is giving you the and what I've kind of done with the mages or the mages and the technocrats of Madison is that they're looking towards something bigger. They're not concerned about the technocracy or the tradition mages anymore. They feel like that's a complete red herring. That if you want to like go off and talk about, there's something else behind all of these things that's actually controlling everything, and that's what they're concerned about. But the rest of the world is still stuck in the Ascension War. The Horizon realms of Concordia and Mecca and um, all the different heads of the traditions and the technocracy are very much focused on that Ascension War. The vampires are much more focused on the covering up the of the masquerade and the Camarilla versus Sabbat war that they have going on. The werewolves are more concerned about their Armageddon and their war with their Black Spiral brothers. Um, and everybody's kind of not trying to figure out what's going on, how all of these are connected to each other. And the interesting thing is that um, a lot of books that you're going to have are going to not connect a lot of the dots for a lot of this until they do the Awakening of Ravenos is one of the times that they kind of jam all of the different things together in the Thin-Blooded book, and then a lot of the books, second edition revised talks about what happened there in almost all of the books because it influences all of the World of Darkness, that event.
I just wish I could read faster so I knew more about this stuff.
Yeah,
Every time I sit down to read, I fall asleep.
it is a hard thing to do to read each book, and it is a lot of information. Luckily, I've been studying it for 25 years, so there's a bunch in my brain. The problem is that a lot of my stuff is more knowing it as well from past knowledge and interaction and past reading. And I find it much harder to read these days than when I was a teenager, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I used to be able to read a lot, and uh, but yeah, like a lot like you, most of my knowledge about this comes from the context of playing in the mage game and the previous mage game that I played, also run by Charles, but it was I think we started that one like over 12 or 13 years ago, and so that one's kind of muddled in my brain, but I mean it was still there. Um, but yeah, and I don't think anybody knows like all the lore from World of Darkness. It you could have a PhD level like World of Darkness scholar, and he would still not know everything, or
That,
she,
that would be an
or they.
interesting degree to get or to try and try and prove that you have. But yeah, I think that
Right.
we're coming up here on 45 minutes, so I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here, unless there's anything else that you want to go over.
Uh, we'll just continue to have these conversations into the future, and I'm sure we'll have different takes as we go for it, and more knowledge as we learn more about it. And who knows, in 5 years be we might get that bachelor's degree in World of Darkness.
I'm gonna start studying now. That's a good idea. No, wait a minute. I have been.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Uh,
try, but once I start reading that book, I'm gonna fall asleep. So,
all right, man. Well, thank you all for watching, and have a great night.
good night, everybody.